All right, thank you, Weepin. So, Weepin, as I said, was from the Humanist Society, which is one of the two organizations that's been putting on this event today. However, the other stars that we have here are people from the Effective Altruism group here in Singapore, and so they're going to introduce the concept of effective altruism, and I'm not sure what are all the bullet points of your talk, but take us away, Kyle.
So, hi, my name is Kyle. I'm one of the organizers of Effective Altruism in Singapore. And so in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a rough overview into what we think effective altruism is. So just to start off with something a little bit interesting. How many of you recognize who this person here is? Yeah, this is T.T. Duray, right? He was the former CEO of the National Kidney Foundation. And so if you remember this, what happened is in about 2004 it was found that he was intending to install a gold tap in his office. And there were other things as well, like millions of dollars in bonuses, really high salary. He was getting chauffeurs and so on and so forth. So really extravagant. And this is an example of a lack of transparency, amongst other things, right? And effective altruism gives us a response to these kinds of problems, but it's not just about responding to a lack of transparency or some inefficiencies. Effective altruism asks us a more positive question about if I want to maximize the amount of good that I do, if I want to do the most good that I can possibly do, what should I do with my time, with my resources, in order to do that? And so that can range all the way from where should I donate? Should I give to a specific charity? Should I give to a specific range of charities? All the way to should I volunteer full-time? Should I work really hard and advance in my career and use a chunk of my higher salary to give back to charities? Some people actually do that. And so these are the questions that we're interested in answering. But before I get to a more concrete definition, I want to tell you about the two values that make us different from most groups. The first one is reason, and I know this is a very difficult word. I mean, I don't personally know of any friends who profess to be unreasonable, but what we mean by reason is a very specific and rigorous process where we lay out the various options that we have to solve a problem, and then we test them and use the evidence that we find to drive our decisions. So we're driven by the evidence that we find. And so just to give you a really counterintuitive example that is reasonable, that we think is reasonable, is that suppose you want to lift a whole bunch of people out of poverty. It turns out that one of the really effective ways to do that, surprisingly, is to fund deworming programs. And deworming programs are just simply maybe a couple times a year, a charity goes down to a community in the developing world and gives the students in the community a small pill for you and me. It's sort of like just taking Panadol. It's very simple. It clears them of parasites that would cause them to be otherwise ill, uncomfortable. Sometimes the medical conditions can get quite serious, and it keeps them out of school. So what's surprising is that the cost of one treatment, from sourcing the drug all the way to delivering it to the student, is about 50 cents. It's really cost effective. And it turns out that this is one of the best ways that we can lift people out of poverty. And the way that we know this, or the way that we think we know this, is that the various options that we have are laid out in front of us. So we have some concrete definitions of what we think a community looks like when it's better off, and what a community looks like when it's not so well. And then we compare the various options. For instance, deworming, scholarships, giving uniforms. And in this case, many of these interventions were tested with randomized controlled trials, which is about the best way that you can get a proper scientific experiment to compare these various options. And from these various options and from these studies, we find that it seems that deworming does a really good job at lifting people out of poverty. And so that's counterintuitive, but it works. And another thing that makes us different from most people is the value of global empathy. And this can be a little bit hard to wrap our minds around. But if, for example, we decide, if we say we know, we don't know this, but say we know that we can save somebody who's near us for $10,000, if we could do that calculus. And if we knew that we could save, say, 10 people, or 100 people, or 1,000 people with the same amount of money, but who were further away from us, for those of us who are supporters of effective altruism in this way, we feel that the answer is rather straightforward. Because for us, it doesn't matter where the person is from. It doesn't matter what their nationality or what their language is. It matters that we're saving lives. And so these are the two values that make us a little bit different from most organizations. And if you want to remember this in a more succinct way, basically, what effective altruism is about optimizing the use of charitable resources. That's what we're trying to do. And so, in a minute, I'm going to ask ECI to come up and tell us a little bit more about what we've done in Singapore. So these are faces from our team. You might see them around. And you can just come up and talk to us if you're interested in working with us. You can also contact us at info@ea-singapore.org. Or you can find us on Facebook at Effective Altruism Singapore. And even if you don't hear something that you are particularly interested as a specific project to work on, but you still feel like these values resonate with you, please do come up and talk to us. We're really interested to find people who are passionate about the same things that we are. So, tell us a little bit more about this.
Thank you. So, the main question for us is, how can we, as effective altruists, do the most good in Singapore? So, as Kyle mentioned, effective altruism is neither location nor actually cause specific. We just want to do the most good with the resources that we have. So, what we've found so far is that we want in Singapore mostly is to educate people, is to have more events where we teach people to apply effective altruist techniques using reason, using the values of global empathy when we decide which charitable organizations to give to. Now, it doesn't have to be international, it can also be local, because what we found in the local context is so far, we are working on it, but we found that 0.5% of our GDP, with all 4.5 billion Singapore dollars per year, actually goes to charitable organizations, and that's a pretty big lump sum amount, if you work it out. However, so far, about 50% of that goes to a category called religious and other organizations, and as we look into it, we find less and less clarity and transparency in how giving to charitable organizations works in Singapore. So we are, as a group, we are working to begin to make it more clear. So, for example, what we have found is that the top 200 charitable donations in Singapore, out of 2,000 to 5,000 organizations, actually they receive 99% of all charitable donations in Singapore. So this is a situation where it is quite reasonable to assume that we can more efficiently redistribute how charitable giving happens in Singapore. So on the long term, we are looking at recategorization of the local charitable organizations for greater clarity and greater transparency. So ultimately, we hope that there will be, with greater clarity, there will be more efficient distribution of donations to other charities, in Singapore or international that will benefit more than the current situation. For example, there may be so many other charities in Singapore that would use the funds better than the top 10% who receive 99% of the funds. And if we know about them, if we can pinpoint them out, if we can use our process of using effective altruist techniques of just auditing them using stringent measures, bringing greater transparency to the charities in Singapore, then as Singaporeans, we can choose whether we want to give money to some really popular charities or do we want to give to charities that are less well known but we feel advocates our causes just as well, for example. So in effective altruism, I'm just going to touch on this really fast. There is a concept of basically some overfunded charities where you receive more money than you can possibly know what to do with. And that is actually a real problem, or not a problem, but it is a real issue with many of the top funded charities. They receive so much that there is no more marginal benefit to getting $1 more. So one of effective altruism's main techniques is to make sure that we give, once a charity reaches that saturation point when we can identify it, then we will recommend that we give to another charity instead that can better use that extra dollar. So that's so that's one of the long-term projects, and one of the other long-term projects that we want to work on in Singapore is to convince the corporate organizations to apply effective altruism techniques when using their CSR program. So for example, one of our effective altruism members in Singapore, Pooja, her company in Avenue, we are in talks, there's nothing official yet, but we are looking at working with them to apply EA techniques, and in specific for Avenue would be women-oriented support groups who could use more support in Singapore. So, and another one, of course, we are always interested to tie up with like-minded organizations like the Humanist Society or the Rotary Club, who have members who are similar to us in values and are willing also to learn or to apply the process of effective altruism. Thank you.